And we are being discipled by algorithms and allowing them to dictate our feelings and ultimately where we should place some sort of bet. And that rewards those who can bet on the next crisis. So do you see not just the moral dilemma, but also the spiritual dilemma as well? That we are putting dollar signs on feelings, saying, oh, I just have a feeling that this is going to happen. We want to know what God knows in the future so that we can exploit it rather than trusting God for what he provides for us. Welcome back to the Sunday to Society podcast. I'm your host, Riley, where we hope you go from the pews to the public square. We release new episodes every Monday on your favorite podcasting apps such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever else you listen to audio podcasts. You can watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube as well as on Spotify. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you are listening or watching somewhere else. And that helps us get the podcast out to even more people. I want you to think about a scenario here with me for just a second. Imagine you're checking an app to see a countdown to war. You're not praying, you're not preparing, you're placing a bet. 2 weeks ago, we did an episode on money and debt and different things like that. And this episode goes a little bit along with that, but it's not completely one and the same. And imagine that you're checking that app because you've placed a bet. Well, what have you placed a bet on? You've seen the news of traders making $550,000 in minutes by accurately predicting the assassination of world leaders. We've moved from placing bets on sports games to betting on the suffering of nations. It's something that is called the prediction market. But for Christians, is it a more spiritual crisis than that? And we'll talk about that throughout the course of this episode. Because on one hand, we might call it smart investing. And I guess what smart investing actually is depends on who you might be asking. But on the other hand, the Bible warns us that they that will be rich fall into temptation and snares. And today I want us to ask a couple of questions, as has our society become so addictive to the win that we've lost our soul, or we are watching people around us lose their own souls each and every single day. So we're going to be looking at this billion-dollar gambling of current wars, but not just that, in sports betting, how it's affected Christians and the church, and the theological dangers of trying to know the future for profit, and what it exactly looks like to be a person of peace in the economy of chaos. So we'll be discussing and unpacking all of those different things today. But I first want us to look at what exactly is happening. And it's this. It's this, quote, news gambling surge. Here in early 2026, we have seen the U.S. and Israel have a conflict with Iran. In fact, at the time of recording of this episode, those conflicts are still going on today, although it looks a little bit different than it did just a couple of weeks ago. But in April 2026 alone, and by the way, at the recording of this episode, it is still April 2026, that over $1 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars were placed in a perfectly timed bets on the U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict. Now, just a couple of days ago, in fact, it was just over this weekend, that platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi have turned world events into high-stakes casinos. Now, it used to be that if you wanted to gamble, that you had to go to a casino in order to do that. And I guess there's different vehicles on how you choose to gamble money. But now with the rise of internet, online gambling, especially sports betting, you can place bets and take out bets on all kinds of different things. It can now be sports, which has been around for quite a while. In fact, one of the most famous sports betting stories goes all the way back to the early 1900s when the Chicago White Sox had 8 of their 9 starting players throw the World Series that year. In fact, it came to be known as the Black Sox scandal. But now sports betting has become a lot more prevalent in the last 10 to 15 years. But now you can place bets on things such as current events, on if or if not something is going to happen. And we have all of this data that backs up and places odds on all kinds of different things. And even this past presidential election, there were so many different things that you could place bets on. Who was going to win, who wasn't going to win, who was going to win which swing state, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. But in just this month alone of April 2026, over $1 billion was placed on just this one conflict, on what was going to happen, what wasn't going to happen, if something was going to happen, at what point it was going to happen. And the kind of list goes on and on and on. You could probably, if you could drum it up, you could probably have placed a bet on that particular thing of happening. And we have all of this data now that points and makes these odds of if somebody is going to do or not do something. And the church and Christians are not immune to this type of thing happening. Because there's this problem where there are major ethical concerns regarding government officials using classified info to reap millions of dollars in stock and betting markets. And that's really a different episode for a different time. But you can take that information, insider trading is what it's usually called, and you can take that type of information before it gets out to the public. You can place bets and immediately make millions of dollars in just a matter of moments because you have some insider information before it goes public, which, again, by the way, is illegal. But again, that's a different topic for a different time. But here's what's happening. People are placing bets on all kinds of different things in all kinds of different places. And it's not just the news, it's sports, it's the news, and it can be on all kinds of different things, just regular traditional gambling, what we might think of. We are no longer in a society that produces. Instead, we are a society that predicts. We are trading dignity of labor, building something up so that you could have generational wealth, so to speak, or building something up through hard work. Now we've traded that for a dopamine of the wager. You know, how do people even get addicted to things like gambling? How do you get to a point where somebody has gambled their entire life savings away? How do they get to that point? Well, they're chasing the dopamine hit. They're chasing a feeling rather than trying to build up something through years and years of hard work. I guess for some people, it could also be they're chasing the get rich quick. If I can just hit this one winning, if I can just hit this one jackpot, then I will be set. Now, just to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, those types of bets, especially in a traditional casino setting, are very much stacked against you. Whether it be something like the lottery as well, those odds are very much against you in the long run. But sports betting, I guess it's a little different story. However, are we as Christians, are we using our resources wisely that God has given us? Again, we talked about this just a couple of weeks ago in our money episode. Who are we allowing to control us through our finances if we're not giving them to God? Have we made those things an idol? We talked about that last week, where people have made money an idol in their life, and they've resorted to something like betting or sports betting, news betting, list goes on and on. They have made that an idol to where now that controls them in their life and no longer allowing God to use somebody's finances to work his purpose through them. So that's kind of what's happening. Now, here's the data, and here's really the root cause of where we are at. In fact, we as Christians many times have lost empathy for other people because when our money is riding on the timing of an airstrike, you stop seeing human tragedy and instead you see dollar signs. And you say that out loud, and that's such a terrible, wicked thing, and it is, but that's what we have reduced it to. We no longer see the other side of it. Instead, we're not loving our neighbor as ourselves, but instead we are looking at data points in order to achieve greater economical wealth. And again, Christians are not immune to this, because there might be Christians sitting in the pews around you on any given Sunday, and they might have placed their own money on some sort of bets like these. And so it really forces us to no longer love our enemies as ourselves, but instead hope that something as tragic like this would happen so that we might be able to get a nice payout. And that's a terrible, wicked thing, isn't it? Really, a word that has been thrown around a lot, it seems like in the last 5 years, has been vibes. There's really been this vibe economy, and research from this year, 2026, shows that feelings and viral momentum often outweigh facts. Here's what I mean by this. Let's say somebody is going to place a news bet. They're going to place money on some sort of event happening in the news. And what do they base that on? Do they base it off facts? Well, I guess sometimes they could, but other times they might be placing those off of strictly feelings. Now, we know that feelings are never, ever going to produce something worthwhile, are they? Feelings are just going to persuade you in a different direction. Feelings are going to deceive you. Feelings aren't going to get you very far, and yet we are placing real dollar signs on feelings and a viral momentum. Now, if that doesn't alarm you, I don't know what will. And we are being discipled by algorithms and allowing them to dictate our feelings and ultimately where we should place some sort of bet. And that rewards those who can bet on the next crisis. So do you see not just the moral dilemma, but also the spiritual dilemma as well? That we are putting dollar signs on feelings, saying, oh, I just have a feeling that this is going to happen. It's not only that, but it's an institutional decay. In 2026 survey shows that public faith in politics and institutions is in the gutter, and maybe you yourself feel something like that as well. And to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily blame you for feeling like that either. So when people don't trust the system to be fair, they decide to gamify the system instead. Now, how do they gamify it? They do it through placing bets, because maybe they think that they are going to produce some sort of profit from that. And there's, again, this not only moral dilemma that is beginning to take place, but there is also a spiritual, and I would argue more important, spiritual dilemma taking place as well. And we will talk about that here in just a couple of moments. But here is some of the data that and root cause of what is beginning to take place. Now, people have differing opinions on what a Christian should do with their money and shouldn't do with their money. And we'll talk about what God says in his word here in just a second. But if somebody is placing bets on like that, is it a stewardship issue that they're just not good with their money? Or is it really more of a spiritually rooted issue? Is it somebody who's attempting to have control without submission? We want to know what God knows in the future so that we can exploit it rather than trusting God for what he provides for us. Are we trying to take the place of God in the sense of we're betting on the future for our own needs rather than choosing to trust God with our future and him providing for the needs that we already have? Because most people who place bets, most of them are going to continue to play and play and play. And don't get me wrong, they might win from time to time. However, you normally see people who have risked it all, got desperate, and now they don't have a single penny to their name. And at the core of it, is it a spiritual problem? And I think that it is. That we want some sort of control over world events, over world outcomes, over our own finances, but we, for whatever reason, are not willing to submit to God in the future that He has already seen ahead of us. So what does God say about this? Well, He says, number one, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, but they that will be rich fall into a temptation and a snare. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, why would somebody even get to a point in their life where they are willing to place bets on outcomes of war? I think we do have to come to the verse that we just read, for the love of money is the root of all evil. What this verse is not saying is the money itself is the root of all evil. What it is saying is that the love of money is the root of all evil. Why do people place bets on sports or news events? Is it because they're wanting to do it just for fun? Well, I guess that could be some people. But I would venture to say that most people are doing it for some sort of financial profitability. Betting on war isn't just about finance. I would venture to say that it's the love of money at its most predatory. That they will use something like this in order to make an extra dollar or $100 or $1,000. And I guess when you get into high stakes, then you're beginning to bet thousands and thousands of dollars on something like this. And you're either winning it or you're losing it. And I would say probably most of the time you're losing it. And we really then have to take a hard look at ourselves and think, well, what am I doing that is because of the love of money? You know, there's been people, Christians all throughout history, who have, for one reason or another, think that you have to give up everything and live in poverty for the rest of your life in order to pursue after God. And that's not it at all. However, if we are so given over to money that we are doing things like that in order to achieve more money, that is when the love of money is the root of all evil line has been crossed. Because we are now betting on things so that we could become more profitable in our lives. Solomon, who was probably one of the most richest people to ever walk the face of the earth, said this in Proverbs 28, verse 20. He said, a faithful man shall abound with blessing, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent. Now, when Solomon had wealth that we could not even imagine in today's society, he's basically saying this, that if you become rich quickly, you are doing it in such a way that you will not be innocent. What's he mean by that? You have probably either A, stolen it, B, got it through ill-gotten gain. You have scammed people. Basically saying that there is no quick way to get rich. There is no such thing as a get rich quick thing. In fact, the Bible does warn, as we just read, about getting rich quick mentality because it bypasses the character building process of work. Now, if you are going to work hard in order to achieve something, you are going to appreciate the thing that you've worked hard for so much more than you would if you had gotten it through ill-gotten gain. If you worked hard and saved up your money to buy that house or buy that vehicle or buy whatever it might be, rather than gotten the money through ill-gotten gain, you are going to appreciate that, whatever it might be, so much more through hard work in that character building process than if you had gotten rich quick. That's why I think that people who win large amounts of money, why are they so broke not too long after that? I don't have the data in front of me, but a lot of people, and there's several documented cases of people who have won millions and millions of dollars through the lottery, yet they are broke in just a couple of years after the fact. Why do you think that is? It's because they achieved that money through get rich quick, and there was no character building mentality, no character building process through all of that. And that's why that money kind of goes out just as quickly as it came in. And the Bible, again, warns about this, and Solomon warns about this. Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount says in Matthew 6, verse 34, "Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself." And when we are placing bets on things that might or might not happen in the future, and Jesus says, "Take there no thought for the morrow," we see that God owns the future, doesn't he? In fact, God is outside of time. And what I mean by that is God knows the past, the present, and the future. And when we are trying to commodify tomorrow, essentially we are acting as our own gods. We are trying to profit on the outcomes of things that might or might not happen. When Christ says actually something quite contrary to this, when he says, "Take there no thought for the morrow shall take thought of the things itself." And when we are placing bets on that, whether it be sports bet, news bets, any other types of bets, we are saying that we are our own gods. So that's what God says. But what do we do about it? What is something that we can do? I think firstly we have to do this. We have to do a heart audit. Maybe you yourself have been audited for some reason, or maybe you are an auditor yourself. But we as Christians, we have to audit our own hearts from time to time. And in this context, are you more excited about your portfolio growth during a crisis than you are about the loving your neighbor? If you are more concerned about gains depending on somebody else's pain, I think we have truly left the second greatest commandment of loving thy neighbor as thyself. And we really have to take a deep, hard look at our hearts. Does a heart like that truly reflect the love of Christ? I don't think it does. Does a heart like that truly love their neighbor as their self? I don't think it does either. You know, we won't even talk today about the whole stewardship aspect of placing bets like that. And that's, again, a different topic for a different time. But when is the last time that you've truly done a heart audit in your life? Paul in 1 Corinthians tells the Corinth church to examine themselves before they take communion. Now, why would he warn about something like that? It's because God is very serious about our heart condition, isn't he? Now, we know before coming to Christ that our heart is filthy and wicked, and even after the fact, the heart is still deceitful. That's why it's important for us to do a heart audit so that we can make sure that our heart wants to do what Christ would have for us to do, rather than going off feelings and try to profit off of somebody else's pain. Do we see Christ profiting off somebody else's pain? No, we don't at all, do we? There's also this idea of this hustle culture, and there's nothing wrong with hustling to build up something, but sometimes there's this idea as well to find a shortcut. Can I say that there's not a shortcut to wealth? We have to instead reclaim this theology of work, of do what Solomon does and be faithful and build up something through this character building process. Now, why should we do something like that? Because God has called you and I to be stewards of the earth. In fact, he's called us to be good stewards, period. You know what Christ has not called us to do? He has not called us to be a gambler of the news. He hasn't called us to profit off somebody else's pain. Instead, no, he has called us to be stewards of the earth. And when we are doing things like this, such as betting and gambling and things like that, which we might consider as being unwise stewards of our resources, is that doing what God has called us to do? It's not at all, is it? And so God has called us to be these stewards of the earth and not gamblers of the news. You see, the world is placing bets on falls of kingdoms, aren't they? That's what the world does. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of Christians out there that do that exact same thing as well. However, Christians should bet their lives on the rise of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because we know for a fact that that will happen, won't it? How do we know that will happen? Well, the Bible says that in Revelation. It says elsewhere in Scripture that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's what the Christian should be betting their life on. The King of Kings coming back. So that's why this week, instead of putting your money on some sort of prediction on something that might or might not happen, instead we should be putting our time into a person of need, because that is what will help build the kingdom of heaven. That's where we should be placing our resources in, showing other people the love of Christ and what he has come to this earth to do for us. That's what we should be doing about it. Rather than placing bets on people's downfalls, we should instead be placing our life in the hands of the King of Kings. And so here's what mission we should be doing this week. You see, on Sunday, the pastor might preach and reminding us that God is all powerful. And what society is telling us this is that we can gamble on his plans. However, don't be fooled by this. Instead of placing our financial bets on things that might or might not happen, instead we should be placing our lives in the hand of the Almighty God, who already knows the future. Here's a closing verse. It's Hebrews 13, verse number 5. It says, "Let your conversations be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." You know, part of the reason why a lot of people fall into this trap of news betting or sports betting or gambling altogether, it's because they see what other people have. They get covet those types of things. And then they think, well, how can I get that type of wealth? And the quickest way they see to that type of wealth is through some sort of gambling or betting. And when the author of Hebrews says this, "Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." God is trying to get across us that we should be content with the things that he's already blessing us with, and not try to profit off of something that we don't already have. I hope I've given you some things to think about in this episode. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the audio version, to hit that follow button. You can leave us a like wherever possible and a comment. That helps us get the podcast out to more people. You can like us on our Facebook page at Sunday to Society Podcast, and you can follow us on Instagram at Sunday to Society. I hope you have a great day, and God bless.